week's episode of Dragon Ball Super! Lord Beerus, the god of destruction, finally makes his way to King Kai's planet and is gearing up for a big battle with Goku. This week's episode also saw the return of the most terrifying and diabolical trio of villains ever seen in the Dragon Ball universe. I'm talking about the Pilaf gang. Episode 4 of DBS is probably going to be one of the most divisive episodes amongst the fan base because this episode right here was dominated by the goofy, over-the-top, ridiculous, and clownish actions of the Pilaf gang. Pilaf, Mai, and Shu have returned just like they did in Battle of Gods, and this time they're even goofier than they were before. And just like in that movie, they end up meeting with Goten and Trunks, all in an effort to try and steal the Dragon Balls and to fill their stomachs. Not exactly the greatest episode of Dragon Ball Super, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't care for this one that much, despite the fact that I do love the Pilaf gang and I think they're very funny. I just appreciated them a little bit more in the original Dragon Ball series, when that one was dominated a little more by comedy, and it was also showing how our characters were going to grow from these goofy young kids into the warriors of Earth. But seeing them return certainly does evoke some old memories of the series, and honestly, this was a very nice looking episode. If anything, I really loved how they had these very dark and bold outlines for all of the characters. Some might say that it makes it look a little more cartoony, but Dragon Ball already has kind of a cartoony art style anyway, and frankly, I thought it made everything look really clean and very nice. This is probably an art style they're only going to use occasionally, and probably for episodes just like this which don't involve action. But really, if you've seen Battle of Gods, you've pretty much seen this episode, except that the introduction of the Pilaf gang is a little longer and we get to see them actually arrive on the boat. Other cool things about this week's episode is that Goku and Vegeta are continuing to train, and at the very end of the episode we get to see that Goku's training is still actually causing a lot of destruction to King Kai's planet, and his house is continuously collapsing. I guess you get what you pay for when you have an ape and a cricket build your house. Overall, though, I think my favorite part about this week's episode was just the very end when you see that Goku actually starts to learn about Lord Beerus because King Kai accidentally spills the beans. So he has to tell him all about the gods of destruction and how he's not exactly a bad guy, he's just doing his job, but he certainly has a lot of power and he can destroy just about any planet with the flick of his finger. And then suddenly at the very end, Lord Beerus arrives on King Kai's planet and gets ready to throw down. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Dragon Ball Super? It's okay. This is probably the most average episode of the series thus far, and, you know, you're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. It really depends on how much you actually like the Pilaf gang. Frankly, I think their antics are ridiculous, and they almost seem like they don't belong in Dragon Ball anymore, because in the first half of the Dragon Ball anime series, they were like the very first major villains of the entire series. I basically consider the Pilaf gang kind of like the pre-rendition of Team Rocket from Pokemon. Like, they always fail, they always have these ridiculous, stupid plans which never work. Despite that, they always end up finding the Dragon Balls, and it always just ends up making things way worse for them, which is incredibly ironic and funny, because they want to use the Dragon Balls to basically take over the entire world, or Pilaf himself wants to be the emperor of the world. And just like in Battle of Gods, the Pilaf gang has been turned into children, which I actually think is a very nice juxtaposition to GT, where we see them when they're very, very old. Otherwise, this was just a ridiculous, goofy episode of the Pilaf gang trying to find the Dragon Balls, outrunning a shark, meeting Goten and Trunks, and a little bit of training from Vegeta and Goku. That's about it. On the upside, next week's episode looks like it's going to be very fun. It looks like we're finally going to get that first battle between Beerus and Goku, and it looks like it's going to be way different from the movie. Looks like we're going to have way more choreography and a little bit more added to the fight, and that means we're definitely going to have to get excited for next week's episode. I cannot wait to see what their next battle is going to be like, and maybe we'll finally be introduced to those new characters who we haven't even seen yet. I really can't wait to see how they're going to unfold that in this series. All in all, though, I do have to say that I did like this week's episode of Dragon Ball Super. I like seeing the return of the Pilaf gang, despite the fact that their introduction was a little long-winded. I also really liked the unique art style they used in this week's episode with the very bold lines. I also liked just a few funny moments, which was just everybody hanging out on the ship, Android 18 and Krillin. I thought that was funny, and I'm really pumped up for next week's episode. But this one right here was kind of average, probably the weakest episode of the series thus far. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Hardcore Dragon Ball fans should definitely check this out. It's definitely got something for all those old school fans. People who are kind of casual might not care for this one, but if you're even slightly interested in the series whatsoever, check it out, you might see something you like. So, you heard my thoughts about this week's episode, but what about you guys? Are you excited for the return of the Pilaf gang? Who's your favorite member of the gang? Pilaf, Mai, or Shu? And what do you hope to see from the rest of the very first arc of Dragon Ball Super? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. That way you can see all of our latest anime and manga reviews and our weekly podcast show, The Powerful Nerdcast. It's pretty freaking awesome. You guys can also find that on iTunes and on Rogue Intel. You can download our show for free. I'll put links for that in the description box below. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby!